Now. Hi, I'm Scott Price, and welcome to APV On the Air. I am joined today by my Deputy Director, Courtney Gardner, my President of the Alliance for Progressive Virginia, Rhonda Henning, and our guest today is Senator Jennifer McClellan. Jen is the senator from the 9th District, which covers a good bit of Richmond and a little bit of the area around it. And Jennifer is a mover and shaker in Virginia politics and recently announced candidate for governor in 2021. So we're going to talk for about an hour or so, and we're going to talk about a number of issues. Jen, first I want to ask you how you're doing in the pandemic and with everything else and the heat wave and all of that. How's the family?
I think all things considered, we're doing okay. We are definitely things are different, and hopefully we won't get Zoom bombed in the middle of this interview. I've taken over my daughter's room as my space. So we'll see if she decides she wants to be a part of this interview.
Well, we'll be happy to have her.
Here comes my cat now.
There's going to be some cat interruption.
Yeah.
I think that is just the way the world works now, and maybe not the worst part of the way the world works now. So what I thought we would do is we'd start out, as we were talking a little earlier, the session that ended in March, the 2020 session that ended in March was really historic. After a series of historic elections, Democrats took control of the administration and both houses of the Virginia legislature, and went about pretty remarkable set of changes that are that we've been, as an organization, been working on for years. And then, of course, right after that, they adjourned. Everything went off the rails a little bit in the country and in the state, and I think people forget about the massive successes that we had this year. And I thought we would talk a little to begin with, Jen, about the large amount of legislation that you brought to the floor and that you passed this year. You passed the ERA, and which was remarkable because Virginia was a state that put the ERA over the top. You basically you ended TRAP as the targeted regulation of abortion providers. You put in a lot of voting legislation that makes it a holiday that makes the election day a holiday. All sorts of stuff, anti-discrimination legislation. So we could talk about that for the rest of the day, basically, not just this hour, but the rest of the day. But I thought I would ask you if there were some things that you were particularly proud of and that you particularly wanted to highlight.
Yeah, so just myself alone, I put in 49 bills, and 36 became law either as my bill or in the budget or something. So I'd say the ones I'm the proudest of, for different reasons. The first is the Reproductive Health Protection Act, which removed, in addition to TRAP, got rid of the mandatory ultrasound, allows nurse practitioners within the scope of practice to perform abortions, got rid of the medically biased informed consent, got rid of the mandatory ultrasound. And I remember, when I was pregnant, I was first member of the House of Delegates to be pregnant while in office in 2010, fighting against the ultrasound bill and failing. And so now to roll all that back, I'm tremendously proud of that. Then second, the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which will make Virginia 100% of our energy, our electricity generation from clean resources by 2045. And that was a transformative bill that we did in one session. And it took every ounce of legislative and political skill and patience that I had, and we weren't sure up until the moment it passed that it was going to pass. And it was so big a deal that when the bill passed, I felt like jumping up and saying, we landed on the moon, like, the eagle has landed. And then the third one I'll highlight that hasn't gotten a lot of attention, but is a significant deal, is the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. When all of the worker protections that we think about, unemployment, minimum wage, workers' comp, anti-discrimination, there are lots of jobs that were excluded, including domestic workers, and that's a relic of Jim Crow. And as the daughter, every woman in my mother's family was either at some point a domestic worker or a healthcare worker. And so we were able to make Virginia the first state in the South to pass any protections for domestic workers. We removed the exemption for minimum wage, and we put a working group in place to recommend for the 2021 session how to remove exemptions from other laws. And given how the Virginia economy was literally built on the backs of domestic workers and home care workers, we also removed the exemption for home care workers, and we put us on a path of increasing the minimum wage to eventually $15 an hour. Those in and of themselves are hugely significant, and probably the bills I'm the most proud of. But you name the issue that we've been fighting for, we made progress this year. Everything. So it was a really big deal this session.
Yeah, for us, it was, we had introduced legislation to ban conversion therapy maybe 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And that passed as part of the larger LGBTQ set of bills that, again, just groundbreaking, especially first state in the South to really move on that issue.
The Virginia Values Act, not only did it extend protections to the LGBTQ community, but it is the most expansive civil rights bill passed in Virginia in modern history, because it strengthens existing civil rights laws for all groups.
Yeah, it's like you said, you look in every direction. The anti-discrimination bills were really strong. The housing bills were really strong. I'm looking at my list here.
Gun safety.
Yeah, all the gun bills. We didn't get the assault ban, but we've got
still working on it.
Yeah, and just again, I think that I just wanted to start out with this because I don't know that people appreciate how sweeping this victory was, and it gets lost in some of the other stuff that's going on. But so much of what's going to happen, I think, in the next month and next year is predicated on the work you guys did this session. I think you can add so much more as time goes by.
And thank you for all of that, by the way.
You're welcome. Oh, it was my pleasure.
I'm sure it was.
Yeah. There were several moments.
Cry.
I was just going to say, there were so many moments I wanted to cry. I was so happy with what we did.
Yeah.
Yes.
Some things were powerfully symbolic. Having Speaker Philicorn, I think, meant a lot to a lot of us. And I mean, going into the session, we knew a lot of this was going to happen, but actually being there when it was happening was absolutely remarkable. And and in all honesty, thank you for your leadership. Your leadership. I will also point out this was a victorious year for the Legislative Black Caucus. I think your agenda pretty much passed with very few exceptions. So. Congratulations on that as well.
Thank you.
Speaking of the Black Caucus, I really wanted to know I've heard the policies and proposals you have for special session, August 18th. I'd love to hear more about those and what you expect to see.
Yeah, so for special session, the governor's call includes, obviously the budget. We will have to address the budget and some of the things related to COVID, like, the eviction moratorium will be lifted, the moratorium on utility bill disconnect. So we'll have some legislation around that as well as just fixing the budget. And then police reform and criminal justice reform. So we could also spend an hour just on that. So I'll sort of do high level buckets of what we're going to focus on. The first is a independent investigation, transparency, and accountability around police misconduct. So we are working on legislation to create civilian review boards that are authorize localities to create civilian review boards with teeth that have subpoena power, that have binding recommendations with an appeals process. We are working on what we call the Marcus Alert, which here in Richmond, is named after Marcus David Peters, where you would have, if someone is in a mental health crisis and a 911 call is made, that you will have a mental health professional who will be on the scene as a first responder to help deal with that crisis, rather than having the police be the ones to deal with the crisis. We are working on banning chokeholds, banning no-knock warrants, and some of the, putting parameters in addressing the inappropriate use of force. So that's one huge bucket. We will also be working on broader criminal justice reform, that many of our laws, the punishments for crimes don't meet, they're too harsh. The punishment doesn't fit the crime. So either eliminating low-level offenses or reducing punishments where there is no injury on a wide variety of things. So, right now there's like assault on a police officer is a really good example. It doesn't matter what it is, it's a felony. So if you throw an onion ring, and this is a true story, you throw an onion ring at a police officer and it touches them, that's a felony. So putting gradations in to meet, the reality of what happens, giving prosecutors the ability to be more merciful, getting rid of some of the mandatory minimums so that they have flexibility, so that there's proportionality. Expungement issues. I mean, there's so much that we will start. We will not be able to do everything that needs to be done in special session, but we are going to start that process in special session, get as far as we can, and then pick back up during the regular session in 2021. I'm probably forgetting some areas, but sentencing reform. We basically want to make sure that the entire criminal justice system, from the beginning to the end, we are focusing our resources on preventing crime. We are focusing on making sure the appropriate people and professionals are responding, so that people in a mental health crisis, people with intellectual and developmental disability are not being criminalized for behaviors that shouldn't be crimes. And that if someone is arrested and charged with the crime, their ability to get justice, the justice system is not dependent on how good your lawyer is and how much money you have to get a lawyer, and that we are focused on rehabilitation and reentry and not just punishment and warehousing. So we're gonna, again, there's so much work that needs to be done that we will not finish in special session, but we're gonna start in special session and then keep going, because the time is now. Time is now. We have momentum on our side. We have public support on our side, and so we can't wait anymore. We've waited too long. I mean, we're fighting some of the same fights that we were fighting 50 years ago. So the time is now.
I agree. It's long overdue, and I'm happy to hear that you're on that. Can we speak a little more about the Civilian Review Board? I know you said with subpoena power, with teeth, that's really important, and I wanted to hear a little more about that. Just explain what you expect, what your goals are with that.
Yeah, so there's some areas, I mean, not just in Virginia, we have 3 civilian review boards now. We have, models all across the country. We know some of the best practices that work, but I think bottom line is leaving it to, the police department to investigate and handle its own members has, in a way that's not very transparent, has left a lot of people to lose faith and trust in that process. And so we're working on a couple of things. One is just enabling legislation that says to our local governments, make clear that they can do this, have some guidelines and best practices, have the Department of Criminal Justice Services sort of put parameters around, what a civilian review board can do. One of the things which they don't have now is give them subpoena power so that they can fully investigate and don't have handcuffs on investigating. Making sure that when they find wrongdoing, that there are consequences, and that those consequences are clear and transparent. And so the bill draft is not finished, so I can't go too deep in the weeds. I will say when the bill draft is finished and is filed, it will be available on the Legislative Services website. I'll be happy to get copies of the drafts to Scott to share with your membership. But in general, we just want to make sure, and we also have to make sure there's a due process component in place. And so we'll make sure that there is an appeals process so that if, because nobody's perfect. I mean, any process you put in place there could be imperfections. And so we'll put an appeals process in place, but most importantly, it has to be independent. And so that people have faith that the investigator is doing due diligence and really looking at what happened and in a transparent way.
No, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Courtney, did you have more?
No, I was just saying that sounds really good. And yeah, I understand. I was kind of just saying, but I see.
Yeah.
I'm wondering too about if there's interest in dealing with the issue of qualified immunity.
So that draft is not finished either, but I know Delegate Jeff Bourne is working on a bill that's on the Legislative Black Caucus's agenda that would make it clear. Again, the whole point is if there is wrongdoing, whether it's a violation of an individual's civil rights, all the way up to, unlawfully killing someone, that there's accountability, and part of that accountability is the ability to sue for damages, and which the qualified immunity doctrine doesn't allow. And so Jeff is working on a bill to make sure that police officers who violate individual rights, that there's consequences. And again, once that bill is finalized, I can send it to you. But that's the gist of it.
Yeah, that's something I think that we're very interested in the sense that it seems right now that that policemen can do things in public, in broad daylight, on camera, and still, claim qualified immunity and end up walking away from the worst elements of what they've done.
Yeah.
So that's a real issue, and I'm glad that Jeff is going to take a look at that. I'm actually supposed to speak with him before the session, so I will be bringing that up with him. I think another issue for us too is the question of establishing a database so that we don't have this problem where policemen wash out of one department and end up in another department almost immediately.
Yeah, and that is also something, both through data collection, and we have a broader sort of police reform bill that Senator Mamie Locke is working on, an omnibus bill in the Senate that will include a component of that. I can't remember who is working on that on the House. That's on both the Legislative Black Caucus and the Senate Democratic Caucus's agenda. And you're exactly right. It's if as a lawyer, if I do something wrong, I could, if it's severe enough, I can lose my law license and not practice anywhere. And everybody knows about it. And pretty much every profession you can think of, there's some element of that. The police should have the same accountability.
Yes, Courtney.
I also wanted to bring up the Breonna's Law and the police of force. The hate crimes, expansion of hate crimes to include the false 911 calls. Like, I liked what I'm trying to say is that I liked what I heard about the declaring racism a public health crisis that's hurting too many people in Virginia. I just wanted to hear a little more about those two elements.
I'm sorry, my son had a question for me, so I think I missed part of your question, but the
Breonna. I just wanted to know if what you thought also would come of these policy requests. Like, do you feel, I know you can't predict the future, but do you feel like there are low-hanging fruit that we should be able to get past for sure? Like the Marcus Davis Peters alert, the Breonna's Law,
yes,
or the 911 false calls being hate crime. What about that one?
So I don't know, because honestly, I'm not sure about we have to do these in a way that doesn't have unintended consequences. And so I feel pretty confident that the Marcus alert, at a minimum, we're looking at a couple of ways. One is enabling legislation that would also create a pilot, because we know the city of Richmond wants to implement this. We know there's some areas that are already doing something very similar. And so we want to make sure we're codifying that and collecting data so that we can make sure going forward everywhere, everyone knows the best practices. So I think at a minimum, we will get on Marcus Alert enabling legislation and a pilot. May take a little bit more time to get sort of a statewide system set up, because that also will have a financial component, and we've got a budget shortfall. So on no-knock warrants, I do think we're going to make progress there. Now, what the pushback we get is there are situations where a no-knock warrant might be appropriate because you're worried about someone being able to destroy evidence immediately, but that doesn't mean, you burst in guns blazing. And there needs to be probable cause. And so I think there may be some element of, you can go to a judge if you have probable cause for a specific thing, but just a broad no-knock warrant under any circumstances, you can bust in guns blazing. I think we can probably get that eliminated.
Okay.
But it's, special session's not very long.
No.
We will not, and a lot of it is going to depend on, and we saw this during this session. Sometimes there are things, it's a good idea, but getting the language right so that there aren't unintended consequences takes more time than we have in a special session. That's basically what happened with the assault weapons ban.
Yeah.
The way the bill was drafted created unintended consequences that we ran out of time to fix. And so, I can't guarantee that won't happen on some of these. I can guarantee the will is there to handle it, and we're going to do the best we can to get as much of this done during special session. But whatever we can't get done during special session, we're going to keep working on in regular session. So
I just really wanted to hear a little more, and you gave me some more insight. So thank
yeah,
you. Mhm.
thank you.
Like more, yeah.
Yeah. Actually, thank you, Courtney. You covered a couple of things I had down here. I'll move through a couple of things quickly. The citizens of Virginia, and particularly in Richmond and in some other places, have taken monument removal into their own hands largely. This is something that we've wanted for a long time. I don't know if we wanted it exactly in that way, but I do want to highlight the fact that obviously this uprising, this organic revolt against everything that's going on, it managed to do some things that we worked on for years, and it did it in a month. But I would point out that we lobbied for years for language that I think you guys passed this year that allowed cities to finally deal with monuments. And I wondered if you'd like to speak to that, because you live right around the corner from, close to the Lee Monument. And
Yes.
I wondered, like the rest of us, you probably had some sleepless nights just because of the helicopters. If you'd want to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. We did pass a bill. So it used to be the law that once a war memorial, and it was the way the language was written, it kind of slipped through, and nobody really appreciated that it was talking about Confederate monuments. But it said localities can put up war memorials, but once they're up, they can't be taken down, moved, changed, anything. And once we saw that law was prohibiting localities from doing what they felt was in the best interest of their community by removing monuments that were put up not during the war, not immediately following the war, but as a backlash to Reconstruction in the early 1900s, and then again as a backlash to the Brown versus Board in the 50s, as part of a sort of white supremacist narrative. Communities were having those conversations and saying it's time to take them down, and that law stopped them. So for many years, we tried to pass a bill to repeal that, and we finally did this year. It took effect July 1st. It put a process in place that localities have to follow, because part of, if we're truly going to heal from wounds that have been festering since the end of the war, the Civil War, if we're truly going to heal, we need to have community conversations around the truth of why these monuments were put up, when they were put up, how they were put up, what they stand for. And so there is a process in place that localities have to follow. But people are frustrated and tired of waiting, and I understand that. I have to say, though, many of these monuments are big, they're heavy, they're old, and I don't want anybody to get killed taking matters into their own hands, which is very possible that if, you do not want that monument falling on somebody.
No.
And we saw in Portsmouth, someone did get injured when a monument fell on them. If that Lee monument falls on somebody, it is going to kill them. It is huge.
Yeah.
And so I just want, it has to be brought down safely, but it's going to be brought down. And I can't help but think about, and I've said this in an interview when I asked how, I never realized how much emotional energy I spent ignoring that statue, which I drive past every day on my way anywhere, because it is triggering. I didn't realize how much of a burden that was until I heard the governor say he is ordering it taken down. And I went to the Circle for the first time ever in my life as part of one of the marches. But in the march, I wasn't looking at the statue. I was looking at the crowd in front of it. And that weekend, I went to the Circle and I took a real hard look at it. And I looked at the statue in the context of all of the graffiti and young Black families almost reclaiming by taking pictures with the Black Power sign, or and I cry. I mean, I get emotional even thinking about it right now.
Yeah.
But that's when I really realized, like, wow, like now we can heal. Now we can heal. And it's like, I don't have to spend time girding myself against the trauma that statue triggers for me anymore. And that's powerful. So, and I know, we still have a lot to do to sort of have those conversations, because a lot of people were raised to believe that monument was not about hate. A lot of people were raised to believe to believe in the lost cause narrative. And those beliefs and the friction caused by the monument is not going to go away when it comes down if we do not intentionally talk about that pain. It's just like any family fight. When you suffer a psychological trauma, or when your family suffers a trauma, you never completely heal from it until you talk about what happened and how did it affect you. And that part of the healing can only begin when we start to take the monuments down.
Exactly. Thank you. Courtney, did you have a follow-up or anything?
Well, I just second the feelings. I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, and we have monuments as well. And I definitely felt that hostile. I felt I was in hostile territory, and I was a child figuring this out without anyone directly speaking to me about it. Just knowing that that's what they represented to all of us. I mean, I really do. I really appreciate what you've said, Senator McClellan, because I felt the same way when they have reclaimed that statue, and with the lights and the John Lewis lights, the BLM, the pride colors, just feeling like something's been touched. I feel a little healed. Feel like things are being addressed finally that have been left unsaid. So I completely appreciate what you've said there.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
I'm going to move on a little bit. We've got a little time left. You mentioned both the question of the eviction moratoriums running out and the unemployment. There's questions, I know, at the federal level about unemployment, but also here at the state. Is that something you think you guys are going to get done in the session? Do you think you have a plan for what you want to do about the moratorium ending? Because obviously, things haven't gotten better.
Yeah, we're working on that in a couple of ways. I mean, in part, it's everything from payment plans, requiring payment plans, to like one possibility is, because we've got what, 4 months of rent basically that people are behind on, and rather than saying like, now you have a balloon payment, you got to pay all of this and come up front, are there ways to tack that onto the end of a lease period, or spread it out, or have eviction diversion and sort of direct payments? And so there are a number of different things we're looking at. Again, a lot's going to depend on what's our budget situation, which we won't really know until right before we go in. I think the governor's going to present his budget amendments on the 18th. And then whether we will get additional support from the federal government, and there are two competing plans going on right now. We were able to use the CARES Act money to do some things. But again, until we get a clear picture of how much money we're dealing with, it's hard to say exactly what we're going to do. But we are very focused on the fact that the same people who couldn't pay their bills, in March, April, May, June, and July won't be able to pay them in August. And that the last thing we want is for, people to be put out on the street in the middle of a pandemic, or for people's utilities to be cut off in the middle of a pandemic. And so, but that's going to require some help at the federal level. And everybody watching, if you haven't already, I encourage you to reach out to our senators are on the right, the right this, Warner and Kane. But if you've got friends in Republican districts, the Senate Republicans are fighting right now over what should be in that relief package. And so they need to hear from us. They need to hear from you. So particularly your friends that live in states with Republican senators, they should be calling right now to say, you've got to put something in to address evictions and utilities and unemployment and all of that.
Well, we won't even start with the national, with what's happening at the national level right now. That's another hour or two. I wanted to recognize my president, Rhonda Henning, who is taking her lunch with us. And I know, Rhonda, you had some questions about voting.
Yes, I'm very worried because we are in a pandemic about mailing in ballots, especially when the Postal Service is under attack right now nationally. We're just not having a good time there. And I do worry because my mail at my own house is very sporadic. And I worry that mail-in ballots, I just want to secure my vote. And I want to, but I also want to feel safe doing so. So one of my questions was, if I order, or if anyone orders a mail-in ballot, say for the fall election, but then they get too afraid to mail it in because they think that it might get lost or stolen or, not get there in time, we can still go to the polls directly, right? If we want to place our votes without somebody saying, oh, you have two because we mailed you a ballot and now you've shown up at the polls.
I think that's right. And I will verify that. But yes, I believe until the ballot is mailed in and they receive it, it hasn't been cast. And so I will double check on that. But a couple of things I will say on mail ballots. We are encouraging anyone who wants to vote absentee to do it early, because we got 45 days. You can request your ballot now, and you will have 45 days until election day. But we also extended the deadline for absentee ballots. It used to be they had to be received by the time the polls closed on election day. We now have until noon on the Friday after the election. But if you vote early, and we are working on getting ballot drop boxes, so that if you don't want to mail it, you can drop it off.
That sounds perfect.
Yeah, we will have in-person absentee balloting, and I know people are worried about going anywhere in public, but I voted in person on primary day, and with your mask, with the 6 feet apart, they handled everything in a way that was safe. I have not heard of any incidents of people contracting COVID from voting in person on primary day here in Virginia. I think in part because we had so many people who voted absentee early, and so there were fewer people coming. When we're not in COVID, usually when I've gone to vote absentee in person before election day, There aren't a lot of people. So I think you can vote in person safely. We will have curbside voting. But I encourage everybody, vote absentee early, because if everybody waits until the end, then we will have a backlog. But we are also going to put some funding in place and working on some stuff in special session to try to make that process smoother.
Ken, I was wondering, because I've never voted absentee. If I voted absentee, do I receive something that acknowledges that my vote was received and it's been tallied, or is it just go into the wind? Because I think that's what something Rhonda and I have talked about.
Yeah, that is the worry, and not to be able to verify that your ballot was received or counted, you know.
You know, that is a really good question. I will get the answer to. I've never voted by mail absentee. Whenever I've done absentee, I've done it in person. So I will verify that.
I believe you're supposed to be able to check if it's been received some kind of online way, but find out.
I'll find out.
Yeah,
And
I believe that.
I didn't find anything where I could verify that they'd received it online, but I don't know if I investigated it over a period of time. So I might have just checked that week.
Yeah.
But I didn't see any way to.
Well, the current chair of the State Board of Elections is my former seatmate in the House, Bob Brink. So I will call him and get an answer for you.
Yeah, I think, you know, in these times that peace of mind is really important, because we're there's a record low on people's trusting institutions right now.
Yeah.
Jen, so as we wrap up, as it turns out, you're running for governor. And I thought we'd end up with asking you why you would want to be governor of Virginia and starting next year, because that's going to be a thankless job. I got to feel it.
Well, so why is really because it's an extension of my public service. I got interested in government as a child from learning about my parents' experiences growing up in the segregated South during the Depression, living through the New Deal, living through the Civil Rights Movement. And as a kid, I came to believe government can either be a force for progressive change that solves people's problems, or it can be a force that oppresses some for the benefit of others. It's been both, frankly. And I, beginning as a college student 30 years ago, started working through the Young Democrats, through community service organizations to first make change in my community, but then elect people to make the kind of government that could solve people's problems and be a force for progressive change. What made me decide to run in 2005, there was an opportunity when Viola Baskerville ran for lieutenant governor. I thought, you know what, I want to be the one working to affect that change. And I've done that as a legislator, but at the end of the day, the governor sets the agenda. Through the appointment process, through the budget, through the tone set from the top on what is the focus of state government. And the next governor is going to have a huge challenge leading a recovery, an economic recovery, a health recovery, rebuilding our healthcare safety nets and our economic safety nets in a way that addresses 400 years of systemic inequity, and in a way that has to restore the faith. And you've touched on it. A lot of people have lost faith in government's ability to solve problems and care about them. And so I can only do so much as one of 140 people, but as governor, I can do so much more and set that tone and make sure we can't just rebuild to where we were on March 12th. That's not good enough. It wasn't good enough for every Virginian then. And so, finally I'll say I'm fighting the same fights that my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents fought. And when I look at my kids, I say, I can't leave it to them to fight those fights. And I can't look them in the eye unless I say I did everything within my power to not leave those fights to you. And that's what compels me to run for governor, frankly, is just to, we've got a lot of work to do, but we need someone who can bring voices to the table, not just bring voices to the table that haven't been heard, but take the table out into the community and listen and have a constituent services focus. Because when people call a state agency, whether it's the legislature or DMV, it's because they have a problem. And we need a government that brings the attitude of, how can I help you today? Not just through the policies that we pass, but just through our whole approach to Virginians and anyone who's calling us for help. And so that's why I'm running. It's really for how we rebuild a stronger future for every Virginian that doesn't leave anybody behind.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we are obviously, I think a lot of us are very excited about your candidacy. So I also wanted to point out, our monthly salons are on hiatus for the future at present. But I wanted to tell you that this counts as your 10th engagement with us over the last 10
Yes.
years.
So I get a T-shirt now, right?
You get a free sub. And although we can probably work out a T-shirt as well, right, Rhonda?
Oh, absolutely. I've got T-shirts, I've got hoodies.
Well, we will get you in under the threshold. But yeah, no. But thank you. 10 years is a long time, and we are very grateful for the fact that you've always been willing to come and talk to us, and I know our membership appreciates that enormously. Jim McClellan, Senator from the 9th District in Virginia. Thank you so much for being with us. And hopefully we'll do this again, maybe before the end of the year, because we'll know a few things after August and then after November. That'll give us some ideas about what we might want to think about for next year.
I'd be happy to come back anytime.
Excellent. Thank you all so much.